Hey guys, welcome back to part 7 of my Discord.py series. Today we're going to be going over mainly the win condition for our tic-tac-toe game and how we can accomplish, right? So let's get started. So first we need some constants. So constants are basically variables that we don't change. So the first one that we'll need is we need to define a blank space somehow. So the way we would do that is that we will make a variable called blank, and now let's assign it some like strings. I want to assign a string called blank, right? I'm also going to be shifting the position up a little bit because remember in Python lists start at 0, but we want it to be easier to read our code and understand our code, right? So I'm going to be shifting everything up by 1, and I'll make a new variable and assign it. So position 1 will be the first item of a list, and that item will be index 0. So in tic-tac-toe there's 9 spots, right? So I'm going to be having 9 position from 0 to 8 or 1 to 9. Depending on how you look at it. We also need some reaction emoji. So this game will function through reaction. The user will actually click on a reaction for which spot they want to move. Let's say they want to put their piece inside spot number 1. They would then click this number 1 button, right? Same thing for number 2 and the rest. We'll also be having a special little emoji, which is a stop emoji. And this stop emoji will be to just end the game automatically, right? So let's go down to this tic-tac-toe function that we wrote last time. So last time we went over how to get the user's character, which is an emoji that they react with, and we also purged the channel so that it looks a little bit neater, right? And we get rid of like the spam. So I just added a check because we'll need this later, right? It's just the same check that we wrote last time down here for get user character. I just changed the name a little bit, but yeah, it's the same check. So let's get started. So first we need to move down that reactions emoji, right? So I'm going to be define this inside the local scope as emojis, and it'll be the same thing. So you can literally just copy it down and change the name of it. So the reason we need 2 copies of this is because for this one I'm going to be changing and removing some of the emojis. So as the user makes their move, we will then take away that emoji from this list, right? We don't want multiple users to make the same move. So yeah, we're going to be removing some of these strings outside of this list when the user makes their move. So next we're going to be needing the board itself, right? So let's make a list, and this board will be in 3 by 3, right? So that means it has 9 index. So for the first row I just want 3 blank spots inside of it, right? Second row is also 3 blank spots, and the third row is 3 blank spots. So as the user makes their move, so player 1, so this variable called player 1 will store the player's emoji, right? So as the player moves, these blank spots will get replaced with the player's emoji, and then that's how we will print it out. So let's get started with the game itself, right? So let's have a while loop. So this while loop will basically keep running until the condition that we give it is false, right? And we want this condition to be a CheckWin condition. So we're going to be making a function called CheckWin, right? And this function will basically check if either player has won yet. And so we want to pass in both players and the board itself. So we will be using the board to check against the players, right? So inside of this CheckWin function, we'll either return either player, like the player's emoji, or we would return blank. If it's blank, that means no player has won yet, right? We also want to check for another condition because this is tic-tac-toe. The maximum amount of moves it can make is 9 moves, right? So if the game goes over 9 moves, it will automatically end. So we start at turn number 1, and we stop the game when the turn is over 9, right? So now let's start with the CheckWin function. So remember how we passed in player 1, 2, and the board? So we need to put them in here in the exact same order, right? So player 1, 2, and the board. In tic-tac-toe, you can win through 8 ways. Either through the 3 horizontals, the 3 verticals, or the 2 diagonals, right? So you can check them through a for loop, looping through every single index and checking those values, right? But an easier way I found to do this is actually to just use an if statement and to check if 3 positions are the same. You could do a for loop, but I feel that's slower and it's less intuitive to write, right? So let's have line 1. So the naming convention I'll be using is calling it line, the direction, which is either horizontal, vertical, or diagonal, and the number times it occurred. So line 1, H1, which is line horizontal 1, right? So inside of this line horizontal 1, we'll be calling a check direction. So a check direction will basically just check a single direction and see if it all matches, right? So we want to take in position number 1. So the reason we're taking in position is because we want this function to work for multiple cases, right? So we don't want this to be like a hard-coded position. We want it to be malleable, right? So we want to use this check directions function multiple times in different directions. So let's say we want to do horizontal. So it's 1, 2, and 3, right? So we're going to be passing in position 1, position 2, and position 3. Those are the 3 spots we're going to be checking. And we're also going to be passing the player and the board itself, right? And inside of this function, we're going to be checking if the board at position 1, if that's equal to the board at position 2. And we're going to be checking if these 2 are equal, right? That means both of these characters inside of this index, they're both the same character. So if they're both player 1s, that means that player 1 has gone inside position 1 and position 2. But remember, this is tic-tac-toe. It's a 3 by 3 board, so we need 3 positions to win, right? So if position 1 is equal to 2 and 3, or that means that player whatever has won. Someone has won, right? But we also want to check, remember, the initial state of our board is 3 blanks, right? So that means this would fulfill the check directions, and that means someone would have won. But we don't want the blank to win because blank is not a player. So what we want to do is have another check here, and we want to check if a board at a random position. So let's say like position 3, this can be any of the 3 positions. We just want to check if it's not equal to blank. If it's not equal to blank, that means some player has won, right? So if both of these conditions are true, that means a player has won. So now we're just going to check if who won. We're going to check who has won, right? So we're going to check if board position 1 is equal to player 1. So we're basically just asking it now that since the above statement is true, so we know someone has won, right? We're just checking to see if player 1 has won. If player 1 has won, we would just return player 1's emoji, right? But if player 2 has won, we would then return player 2. And if this above if statement is not triggered at all, so none of this is true, it would just return blank, right? So that's what we're doing up here. We're checking to see if it's equal to blank, right? So now we're checking the horizontal line, right? So we want to check for the first line, we want to check 1, 2, and 3. So we pass in position 1, position 2, and position 3. So we want to check position 1, 2, and 3 against each other and see if they match, right? And if they match, that means one player has won. And that player who has won will be assigned to this. If no one has won, this variable will then be equal to blank, right? So we want to check if this is equal to blank. If it's not equal to blank, that means someone has won. If someone has won, that means that we just return the line itself or whatever that is assigned here. We do the same thing for the second horizontal, which is position 4, 5, and 6. And the third horizontal, which is 7, 8, 9, right? So then we start going into the verticals. So now we're going to check in for the 3 verticals. So we're going to check in for 1, 4, and 7, 2, 5, and 8, and also 3, 6, 9, right? Now we're going to be checking the 2 diagonals. So we're going to be checking 1, 5, 9. We're also going to be checking 3, 5, 7, right? And so since we're checking this, so we're basically doing the same thing here. We're checking if it's not equal to blank. If it's not equal to blank, we then return it, right? But if all of these are false, we can then return just blank, right? And the reason we don't do an else if statement here is that we want the program to check every single one of them. If we do an else if statement and we check one condition and it's false, it would just skip everything else, right? So we want to check everything. So we do an if statement. Okay, so now that we finished with the win condition, we can then move on to printing the board now, right? So first we want to send out a message telling each player whose turn it is. So we would then do a ctx.send and sending a default message like player 1's turn, right? But we want to be able to use this to send out multiple. So we would then change this into the current player, modded by this will then keep it within the range of the players, right? Next, we want to send out a message, and inside of this message, we want to print out our board. So then we define a new function. Inside of this defined function, we'll call it print board. So for print board, we're going to be taking in player 1 and player 2. We'll also be taking in the board itself. So as we keep going, we'll be modifying the board, right? So next we're going to be defining a blank character. So it's a white emoji. We also need a variable to store our message, right? Because each of our board spot will be a emoji character. So we need a message, and we also need what tile we're currently in. So now we're going to do a for I loop. So we're just going to call it a for X. So inside of this for loop, we're going to be taking the length of the board and going from 0 to the length of the board. Inside of this for I loop, we're going to be checking each board at a specific index, so whatever we're looping through, and we're going to be checking if it's equal to blank. So inside of our print board function, we have 2 different cases. We have one case where if it's modded by 3, which means it's ending ones, we would then need to have a new line, right? So if it's modded by 3 is equal to 0, that means it's 3. We would then have a board, and we would then assign the board to itself, right? But we will also, since this is a blank thing, we will have a blank character, and we will have a new line after it. But if it's not the end of the board, so let's say it's either 1 or 2, we would just add the board to itself and a blank character. That's it. We would then do the same thing for player 1. If it's the ending, we'll add a new line. If it's not, we just add the player's character, right? We would then do the same thing for player 2 and the same thing. If it's the end, we add player 2, new line. If it's not, we just add the player's. And then once we finish running this for loop, we would just return the board's message. Okay, so I forgot one thing, and that is to increment the tile itself. So all we need to do is just add the simple line, which is tile plus equal to 1. So basically what this is saying is that we want the whatever tile was previously, add 1 to it and reassign it to tile, right? Now let's go up here and let's call our function. So let's call print board, and let's pass it the variables it needs. So it needs player 1, player 2, and the board itself, right? So now we're going to assign that variable that we printed out into a message because we are going to be adding reactions to this message. So now that we have the message, we will then do a for loop through the emojis that we currently have, right? So we're doing a for range, which will take from 0 to the length of the emojis that we currently have. And inside of the emoji, we would then call on a way add reaction. So inside of this add reactions, we add each emoji at a specific index, right? So since this loop would loop through every single item inside of the emojis list, we can then pull it out using the emoji at I index. So after we add the emojis, we then waiting for that event. We also have a timeout timer of 30 seconds, and we also need to define a check, remember. So we want to make sure that the user who added that emoji is not a bot, right? So then we'll have a check not bots, which we defined earlier. Then we assign reaction and the user from that await command, right? Next, we then check if the user's emoji is equal to the ending emoji, which is the exclamation point. If it is the ending emoji, we then print out a close statement. This is just for testing purposes, right? We just print out close, and we also have a turn is equal to 100. So what we're doing here is that we're setting turn equal to 100, which this condition will then be equal to false now, right? And then after this, if it's not this, it would then increment the used players and the turn itself. And yeah, that's basically it. So one little mistake I have here is that I'm not casting this into a string, right? Because this is just an emoji. So then we will need to cast this into a string for this to be able to work. So now I also want to have a little debug function. So we will print out whatever the reaction the user reacted with, right? So reaction.emoji. Okay, so now that we're in our Discord and the program is running, let's type in game. Okay, so now that we have our game, we're going to pick tic-tac-toe. Okay, so we're going to react with an emoji, which is the game controller. And now we're going to react for player 2, which is a spotting. So now it's going to say it's player's 1 turn, and it's going to print out the board itself. So as you can see the board here, it's a 3x3. Each spot is an empty square. And as you can see, so it added a reaction for every single step, right? So let's say we click 1, it prints out 1, I'm alive, right? And it will keep doing this as we keep playing the game, right? So let's say we pick 8, it keeps running and reprinting, right? And let's say if we want to end the game, we can just click this button and the game has ended and it doesn't do anything else anymore, right? So yeah, that's basically it. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.